Welcome back to Theology in Shorts, and in today's video we are jumping into a brand new branch of theology, and that is theology proper, or the study of God and his attributes. And in today's video we are answering one particular question, and this question is one of the most important questions that we have to answer as it comes to theology, and that is, does God exist? Certainly, those who are watching may have already established this in our own minds, and yet it's still important for us to, from Scripture, answer this question. If we're taking Scripture literally, if we're taking Scripture for what it says, then the answer is going to be pretty obvious. And yet, what today's video is going to be talking about is, how do we know for certain that God exists? Now, when it comes to talking about the existence of God and maybe even defending the existence of God, this would fall into a branch of theology and maybe an academic study called apologetics, or really giving a defense of something. That's what apologetics means. And there are entire books written of all the different ways that we can go about defending the faith, even defending what we believe in, and really even for proving the existence of God. But there's one particular method that I think Scripture upholds more than any other, and this is really the only Scripture-endorsed method of apologetics. The only Scripture-endorsed method for proving the existence of God is what is called presuppositionalism. And this is really, by definition, presupposing, or before we even enter into the conversation, I am making an assumption that you know that God exists. This is what presuppositionalism teaches. This is the method of defending the existence of God based on Scripture. And I want to take you to Romans chapter 1, because this is where I think we really find the scriptural evidence for assuming that everyone knows God exists. And so before I even get into a conversation with someone who I'm trying to defend the faith to, or I'm trying to explain the existence of God to, this is what's always in the back of my mind. So let's read Romans chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. These verses say, "For God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have now been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened." What these verses describe is the fact that God's nature, even his attributes, are clearly perceived in all the world. When you wake up and you see the sunrise, when you walk outside and take a nice deep breath in and get to smell that fresh air, the sun on your face, the grass in your yard, all the things that you see in creation, all of them testify to the existence of God. And we can go about thinking about that in a lot of different ways, but the reality is that the Bible tells us that we are aware that we have a creator. We are aware and we understand, we know deep within us that we didn't come from nothing. But what does this verse say? These verses talk about the fact that even though it is very clear and obvious that God exists, man does not like to acknowledge that God exists. And this really makes a lot of sense if you think about it. God is a holy God who calls people, who calls all of his creation to be holy as he is holy, to put sin to death and those fleshly desires that we all love so much, calls us to die to those things. It would be easier for me to just say, I can do what I want, and I'm just going to pretend like God doesn't exist. I'm just going to come up with all these irrational thoughts in my mind. I'm going to justify it however I can, that God doesn't actually exist. And if I can do that, then I can rid myself of the guilt that I feel whenever I do things that I know are wrong. And so for mankind thinking and wanting to think that God doesn't exist, it's really clear why he would want to do this. God calls us to be holy as he is. And man not wanting to be holy, man not wanting to do what God desires and calls him to do and commands him to do, suppresses the truth of the existence of God in his own unrighteous thoughts. This is the state of every person. Everyone knows God exists, but man in and of himself does not want to acknowledge God, doesn't want to even bring upon himself that accountability that he has to stand before a holy God who made him. Now, within presuppositionalism, there is a different range of whether or not you give any credence to different arguments for God existence. And I would be one who would say that they can be helpful in supplementing, but we have to recognize that man does know that God exists, and the scripture says so. So what are these helpful arguments? What are these helpful things that can be added to our defense of the existence of God that really actually they pack a powerful punch? I think the first of these is really what's called the intelligent creator argument, or really the intelligent design argument, which is that we live in a world that is so finely tuned, a world so finely tuned for life to exist. The fact that we are, so many miles away from the sun, and that we have just the right combination of hydrogen and oxygen in our atmosphere that gives us breathable air for us to live. The fact that we have seasons and months, and we have all the perfect design for life to exist, and not only to exist, but to thrive in the world. It's impossible for us to actually get this. It is such a fraction of a possibility that life would just, spawn in and of itself. The fact that the world is so perfectly designed, what that teaches us is that there must be a designer. Ray Comfort is famous in his street evangelism for taking strangers and causing them to look at a building and just say, look at this building. Look at all the bricks and the windows and the foundations of it. Do you think that building just came about on its own, or do you think that it had a builder? And every single person he interviews says, well, there must have been a builder. And they say this rightly. There had to have been. That building wouldn't just kind of create itself, or just the right elements, the bricks, the windows, the foundations, the roof, all of it just wouldn't come together on its own. And yet how foolishly we think that the world, as perfectly created as it is, as finely tuned as it is, just came together out of nowhere. See, no one has a problem saying that a building has a builder, and yet the world itself is so fantastically and wonderfully created, and yet mankind still doesn't want to see that it has a creator. This is called the fine-tuning argument, that the world is so finely tuned that there must be God. I think another really important argument that is useful in assisting the argument for the existence of God is the moral argument. Where does morality come from? Right? If we're all just evolved creatures coming from monkeys or wherever else evolution says we come from, well then how is it that we get morality? And why is it that morality is pretty much consistent all across the world, even though there are different cultures, there are different ways of life all around the world, morality seems to be pretty consistent. We all know that it's wrong to steal. We know that it's wrong to lie. We know that it's wrong to kill. All of these things, where do they come from? Well, as a believer, as a Christian, we understand that these things come to us because we are made in the image of God, and he places on our hearts his own law. The unbeliever has nowhere to turn. They say that it must be the result of just, whatever is in the best interest of society. That's what society says is going to be good for it. Well, this isn't always the case. In fact, oftentimes we see that society makes decisions for itself that are terrible. And so this is a poor argument against the moral argument. And so just these two, right? And there are a number of these types of arguments. But just the fine-tuning argument and the moral argument, these two are enough to poke such a hole in any worldview that would say God is not real or God does not exist. These two arguments alone are helpful in assisting us in being able to talk with unbelievers, those who don't believe God exists, and show there is good reason for us to really believe that God does exist. In fact, even in the last video, I said it takes more faith to believe God doesn't exist than to believe that he is. And so these are a couple of the arguments that we can look to as assisting us, but really it's got to come down to what Scripture says. In Romans chapter 1, verses 20 and 21, what God has made, his creation, it testifies of his existence. And so every single person, whether they choose to acknowledge it or not, recognize that God exists because they know there must be some kind of creator. There must be something bigger than them. They might not know all about him. They might not know his character or his attributes, but they know that he exists. And the rest of the videos in this section are going to be covering what is God like. Here in this video, we've sought to prove God exists and Scripture declares so. In the rest of the videos for Theology Proper, we're going to be talking about what is God like. Thanks for tuning in to Theology in Shorts. Hope you enjoyed that video. If the video was helpful for you or you found any of this encouraging or educational, please drop a like on this video below and subscribe so you can know when new videos are uploaded.